Hey everybody, good morning. I know we're all getting tired of Relic Delta, and as the beta, I personally think is getting to a point where we may see things taper off in the next couple of weeks. I do want to talk about one specific problem that persists, and that is the Relic Delta problem in relation to Conquest. Now, I do want to stipulate, of course, that people in the comments are going to say things like, oh, Relic Delta is a problem here and Relic Delta is a problem there. And I understand, but Relic Delta has a problem to the player in relation to what the player wants is different than Relic Delta as a problem to CG and what CG wants. And what we want, what they want doesn't always coincide, right? When I talk about Relic Delta as a problem in Conquest, I'm specifically talking about the way that the game has always interacted with the player in the Conquest game mode and how that is going to fundamentally change when Relic Delta comes to the game. And I want to talk about an idea that I have. It's actually a very simple idea, but an idea that I had that could solve the majority of those problems. And we will do that right after the intro. So, when Relic Delta was first announced, one of the big things that people had a concern with outside of PvP was how this would affect Conquest, because Conquest goes all the way up to Relic 8, and players typically do not have full squads of Relic 8 characters. CG did fix that problem, and they did say, hey, listen, what we're going to do is make Sector 1 of hard mode Relic 4, and the rest of the sectors Relic 5, which is going to give you a pretty good baseline ability to be able to move through the sectors at the same rate you already are. Now, especially because Relic Delta 1 and 2 are pretty small, and Relic Delta 3, I mean, in PvP is a bigger issue, but not as much with the new version 5 numbers in PvE. I think that people who are undermanning or under gearing Conquest are going to notice the difference in how they interact with Conquest now versus later is not going to be a big problem. But the one big problem that has not been solved is feat acquisition, right? And that basically is thinking about characters like Padawan Obi-Wan, who has an Omicron, who already does absurd amounts of damage, and who is an incredibly common Relic 9 because of Duel of the Fates, and how Relic Delta in a positive light is actually going to negatively affect him and many other characters for feat acquisition, right? I'm not even talking about like hard cheese teams. I don't typically use hard cheese teams where you can get everything in one battle because I just don't think it's worth my time, effort, or energy. I do understand that some people are in a different situation than I am. Um, but I am talking about just the idea of being able to get feats in general. Because for those of you that don't know, the way that most buffs, well, for buffs it's irrelevant, but the way that most debuffs work, unless it specifically says otherwise in a kit, is that damage gets dealt before any attempt to apply a debuff happens. And what that means is that if you kill a character on the first turn, or if you kill a character in one shot, they are not going to get an attempt to apply debuff, which means that characters like Padawan Obi-Wan, who do insane amounts of damage, and who are often Relic 9 and are going to see a Relic Delta of 4 in very high circumstances throughout the entirety of Conquest, those characters are going to be killing things very quickly. And I have a solution, and I know it's not a perfect solution, but it is a relatively easy solution from a player standpoint. From a coding standpoint, I've got no idea. I'm not a coder, but because I know that Conquest is going to be turned off for the Strangers Conquest, or I should say Relic Delta is going to be turned off for the Strangers Conquest, I have to believe that there is a check on all of the different game modes, which to me suggests that what I am going to suggest is actually something that is viable. So I can't show you the Conquest game map because Conquest is not live right now. but we are going to go into Galactic War. We're going to just assume that this is a conquest sector map. And very simply, what CG is going to do, and again, I have to stipulate that this is not an official video. This is not currently happening on the beta server. This is not something that is being talked about or tested right now. This is me talking about a solution to a problem and how I think it can be most easily solved. But what's going to essentially happen is down here, right in this little corner, right bottom left corner, there'll be a little bit of a checkbox. And that checkbox will say something along the lines of turn off Relic Delta when team exceeds level. Something like that, right? So a little checkbox, turn off Relic Delta when team exceeds level. And there may even be one of those little circles with an exclamation point so that, if you're confused, you can hover over that. And then there'll be a little paragraph that says something along the lines of when your entire team meets or exceeds the level of a sector, Relic Delta gets turned off, right? So in Sector 5, if every character in your team is Relic 5 or higher, Relic Delta gets turned off. It goes back to the way that the game normally interacts with a player without Relic Delta, right? And what this will allow players to do is move through their sectors as normal if they want to, or move through the sectors in a harder way if they want to, right? So as a player, um, uh, as a player who has a bigger roster, if I want to deal with feat acquisition more than I want to deal with progress, I can checkbox that and I can work through my sector, building my feats and having harder battles. And if I don't want that on, I can uncheck that box, and I will get the benefits of Relic Delta. Now, CG can take this a step further, and they can also add an additional criteria if they want to say something along the lines of, it won't activate until you've actually beaten the boss. All right, so maybe you have to get through the entire sector first, then this will activate. So now if I want to do the datacron nodes, now if I want to try to get specific things to happen, I can turn that on. Now, regardless of if it is turned on or not, if a character in your squad does not meet those conditions, right? And that's the check that happens with that checkbox. If they don't meet those conditions, then Relic Delta gets turned back on. Now, I know that there are going to be players saying like, oh, we should always have that option. But no, listen, I get it. I understand that that's what many players want. I get it that that's maybe what I want as well, but it's an unrealistic expectation to expect CG to just turn on and off a system just because you do or don't like it. The reason why I'm talking about this in relation to feat acquisition is because it is a problem that CG has identified through the help of the community and has committed to fixing or changing in what they say is a player friendly or a player forward way. And I am offering the easiest possible way that they can do that so that they don't have to fully restructure the way that Conquest works in any meaningful way, right? Conquest can exist in the way that it currently does because players like myself, or even players who just have one or two really strong teams, will be able to continue to progress through Conquest in a meaningful way without having to worry about their characters being too strong, right? And this is important because when CG talks about vertical progression and horizontal progression, one criticism that I have always had of CG in the game is that sometimes when you make your character stronger, you actually make things weaker, right? And this happened in Naboo, where if you did certain tiers of the raid, even though your characters were at the right levels, you would get worse scores than you would at a lower level. And we don't want that kind of thing to happen here in Conquest. We want players to be able to see the progression line and move through it. Now, I will remind you again that this will only activate if everybody in your team is the relic level of the sector or higher. So if you bring in all relic 9s and one G12, Relic Delta is still on. Relic Delta will still hit your guys. Relic Delta will be a positive for most of your characters and be a negative for that one other character. Though, keeping in mind, while it may be harder to make the character survive because they take more damage, your enemies also take more damage from the rest of your team, which is going to allow you to kill them quicker to hopefully alleviate the issue that's going to happen on that one character, right? So this is what I feel is a very simple fix for Conquest. I know we have 3 months to solve this problem. I know that because it's not going to happen during the strangest conquest, it is not the most pressing problem. But what it does allow CG to do is not think about this problem from anything other than a coding perspective, not from a fundamental game design perspective. And they can focus their time, effort, and energy on things that they deem to be a little bit more important, including the new game mode, including the economic updates, including anything else related to Relic Delta that is probably going to come up in the next couple of months. So, with that said, let me know what you think. Let me know if you have other ideas, reasonable ideas, ideas that make sense, right? When we talk about this, I am trying to think of things from the perspective of CG, the company, in a way that most benefits the players so that we have like a symbiosis or we have an equitable solution. With that said, peace out. Have a great rest of your day.